On their honeymoon, he promised himself control, but one look from her shattered everything. What happened next rewrote their destiny forever. Where are you watching this story from? Subscribe to the channel and leave a like, because this ending will hit different. The Napa Valley wine still danced in the crystal glasses when Thatcher felt his heart betray every promise he had made to himself over the past 15 years. The candlelight cast restless shadows on the walls of the bridal suite, like omens of a transformation he wasn't prepared to face. The scent of jasmine drifted through the open windows, mingling with the salty perfume of the Monterey coast, and somewhere nearby the strings of a guitar wove melodies that spoke of ancient passions and eternal loves. Thatcher Aldridge Pemberton studied himself in the vanity mirror, searching his reflection for the man he believed he knew. 43 years stared back at him through grey eyes that had learned to reveal nothing. The silver at his temples lent him a distinguished air, and the subtle lines around his eyes told stories of sleepless nights reviewing balance sheets and contracts. He owned a boutique hotel empire that stretched across the entire country, from the dramatic cliffs of Maine to the golden beaches of Southern California. He had built his fortune with iron discipline and an almost superhuman ability to calculate risks, but no calculation had prepared him for Wren. She entered the room after the wedding banquet, her dark hair still damp from the evening mist of the California coast. She wore a simple ivory silk dress that had replaced her wedding gown, and her bare feet left silent prints on the hand-woven rug. Her hazel eyes, those eyes that seemed capable of piercing every armor he had forged over decades, found him immediately. "You've been staring at that mirror for several minutes," she said, with that soft voice that always reminded him of the murmur of the Merced River flowing through Yosemite Valley. "What do you see?" Thatcher swallowed hard. In business, he never hesitated. He could fire an executive without blinking, negotiate millions without his voice trembling, face hostile board meetings with the coldness of a general in battle. But before this 24-year-old woman, with her hands stained by the blue and gold pigments of the stained glass she restored, he felt like a boy lost in a maze with no exit. "I see a man who doesn't deserve to be here," he finally answered, surprising himself with his own honesty. Wren crossed the room with slow, deliberate steps. There was no urgency in her movements, only that infinite patience she applied to every fragment of antique glass that passed through her hands at her studio in the arts district of Savannah. She stopped beside him without touching him, respecting that invisible space he always maintained between his body and the rest of the world. "Deserving is a trap we set for ourselves," she murmured, observing the same reflection he contemplated. "No one deserves love, Thatcher. Love simply happens like rain on rooftops or sun on magnolia trees." He closed his eyes. He could feel the warmth emanating from her body, so close yet so far at the same time. The memory of his first marriage ambushed him. Vivienne with her constant demands, the arguments that echoed through the hallways of the brownstone in Boston, the exact moment he discovered she had emptied their joint accounts while he traveled to Chicago to close a deal. The divorce had been a legal bloodbath that cost him not only half his fortune, but also shared custody of Callum and Beatrix, his 2 teenage children, who now looked at him with a mixture of resentment and confusion. "I don't know if I can do this," he confessed, the words escaping before he could stop them. "I don't know if I have the capacity to—" He interrupted himself, unable to pronounce the word that burned his throat. Love. Surrender. Be vulnerable. Wren sat on the edge of the bed, the Egyptian linen sheets whispering beneath her weight. The rose petals the hotel staff had scattered on the mattress formed a crimson mantle around her, as if nature itself wished to crown her. "I'm not asking you to know anything," she said, extending her hand toward him, not to touch him, but as an invitation. "I'm only asking you to be here, with me, in this moment." Thatcher observed that small hand, with its fingers stained cobalt blue beneath the nails, residue of the work she loved as much as he had learned to love building empires. There was something almost sacred in those stains, testimonies of a life dedicated to returning beauty to the world, fragment by fragment. He approached the bed with rigid movements, as if his body had forgotten how to move without calculating each step. He sat beside her, maintaining a prudent distance, and fixed his gaze on the balcony where the white linen curtains danced with the ocean breeze. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence Wren had learned to inhabit during endless hours in her studio, when the pieces of an antique mosaic resisted revealing their original pattern. Patience was her greatest virtue, a quality she had inherited from her mother Marigold, who crafted hand-blown glass ornaments with the same devotion that medieval monks illuminated manuscripts. "My father used to say the sea keeps secrets," she commented, breaking the silence with softness. "He said every wave that reaches the shore brings a fragment of history, and only those who know how to listen can decipher them." Thatcher turned his head to look at her. The candlelight danced across her features, revealing the mixed heritage of generations of Southerners, the straight nose of English settlers, the high cheekbones that betrayed Cherokee ancestry, the olive skin that the Georgia sun had kissed since her childhood. "Holden also talked a lot about the sea," he said, surprised to be sharing something so personal. "My father. When I was a child and we lived in Massachusetts before we moved to Manhattan, he would take me to the cliffs of Cape Cod. He said the rocks were witnesses to every shipwreck, to every sailor the ocean had claimed. But also to everyone who returned," Wren added. "The rocks saw that too. He felt something loosen in his chest, a knot he had been tightening for years without realizing it. It was strange. He had spent 15 years building impenetrable defenses, and this woman pierced them with the same ease that rain pierces a thatched roof. "Why did you agree to marry me?" he asked suddenly, vulnerability coloring his voice. "You know who I am. You know what they say about me in the papers. The hotel shark. The man without a heart." Wren smiled, that smile that had disarmed him the first time he saw her, bent over fragments of glass in her small Savannah studio. "Because the papers don't know what I know," she answered. "They didn't see how your hands trembled the first time you invited me for coffee. They didn't hear how your voice broke when you talked about your children. They didn't notice how you looked at the stained glass I restore, as if you saw in them something more than simple decorations." "What did I see?" "Hope," she said simply. "I saw the possibility that broken things can become beautiful again." The tears arrived without warning, overflowing the defenses he had maintained for so long. Years of self-imposed solitude, of empty nights in luxury suites, of superficial conversations with women who only saw his bank account, all of it burst forth in sobs he tried to muffle against his own hands. Wren didn't speak empty words of comfort. She didn't tell him everything would be fine or not to cry, or any of those phrases people use to silence others' pain. She simply embraced him, letting the lace of her dress absorb his tears, stroking his hair with the same gentleness she dedicated to centuries-old glass panels. The scent of orange blossom that emanated from her skin mingled with the salt of his tears, creating a sensory memory that Thatcher knew he would carry with him until the last of his days. It was the smell of surrender, of free-falling towards something unknown and terrifying. And in that moment, as the Pacific whispered ancestral secrets against the Monterey rocks and the stars observed indifferently from their celestial throne, Thatcher Aldridge Pemberton, the man who controlled everything, allowed something to control him. Love had begun its work of demolition. Morning arrived with the cry of seagulls and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee that room service had left on the cart by the door. Thatcher awoke disoriented, with the sensation of having slept for the first time in years without the company of his usual demons. Wren was already awake, sitting on the balcony with a cup between her hands, contemplating the sea that stretched to the horizon like a sheet of blue silk. The California morning sun gilded her profile, and for an instant he allowed himself simply to observe her, engraving that image in his memory. "Good morning," she said without turning, as if she could feel his gaze. "Breakfast is served." He rose, conscious of the strangeness of the situation. It was his honeymoon, but it felt more like the first day of class in a language he didn't master. The codes of romance, of intimacy, of shared vulnerability. These were unexplored territories that made him feel clumsy and exposed. "We should discuss the coming days," he said, taking refuge in the planning that had always been his comfort zone. "I have reservations at—" "Thatcher," she interrupted softly, finally turning to look at him. "We don't need an itinerary. We have 2 weeks. We can simply be." He nodded, though the idea of not having a detailed plan produced a dull anxiety. He poured himself coffee, black and without sugar, as he had taken it since he could remember, and sat before her on the balcony. The phone vibrated on the nightstand. Thatcher recognized the tone. It was Vivian's number. "Don't answer," said Wren, though her voice held no reproach. "Whatever it is, it can wait." But he was already on his feet, the conditioned reflex of years responding to the crises his ex-wife manufactured with surgical precision. He grabbed the phone and stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind him. "What do you want, Vivian?" "What a way to greet the mother of your children," she responded, and he could picture her perfectly, seated in the living room of the Boston apartment he had paid for as part of the divorce settlement, with her impeccable manicure and that feline smile he had learned to fear. "I'm on my honeymoon." "I know. The papers won't shut up about it. The great Thatcher Pemberton marrying what do they call her? A craftswoman." "How quaint." He gripped the phone hard enough to make the glass creak. "Get to the point." "Callum wants to drop out of school, says there's no point in studying when his father can buy him whatever future he wants. And Beatrix has decided she won't set foot in your house while that woman lives under your roof." Thatcher closed his eyes. His children, his two most painful failures. Callum, 17, with his constant rebellion and his wasted talent. Beatrix, 15, with her cutting silences and her fierce loyalty to her mother. "I'll talk to them when I get back." "You'll talk to them now," Vivian insisted. "Or better yet, you could explain to them why you decided to marry a girl barely older than they are. How do you think they feel? Wren is 24, and you're 43. Do the math, Thatcher. You were born when she was still in diapers." He ended the call without saying goodbye. His hands trembled, and he had to lean against the hallway wall to recover his balance. The demons he had managed to silence the night before were back, whispering the same doubts that had tormented him since he decided to propose to Wren. When he returned to the suite, she was still on the balcony, but her posture had changed, shoulders tense, the coffee cup abandoned on the table. "It was Vivian," he said, though it was obvious. "I figured." He sat before her again, but the space between them seemed to have widened as if his ex-wife's words had dug an invisible moat. "My children are having difficulty accepting this." "I know. Beatrix says she won't enter my house while you're there." Wren nodded slowly, processing the information without showing the wound he knew she was feeling. "It's understandable. I'm a stranger who appears suddenly in their father's life. A stranger too young, according to some. Age doesn't matter," he said, though the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Age matters to those who want it to matter," she responded. "I don't care what others think, Thatcher. I care what you think." He looked at her, and for a moment saw the fear behind the calm she projected. Wren also had her vulnerabilities, her own ghosts that stalked her in silent nights. "I think I made a mistake," he said, and he saw the color leave her cheeks. "Not in marrying you, but in believing I could protect you from my world. My ex-wife, my children, the journalists, the partners who whisper behind my back. I dragged you into a storm without even giving you an umbrella." "I don't need you to protect me," Wren said, and there was steel in her voice. "I need you to trust me, to let me into that fortress you've built. Not to conquer it, but to inhabit it with you." The words hung between them, charged with meaning. Thatcher felt the weight of the decision before him. Continue clinging to the control that had kept him afloat for years, or release the moorings and let himself be carried by the current of something he couldn't dominate. The phone vibrated again. This time it was a message from his assistant Gerald, informing him of problems at the Charleston Hotel. A pipe had burst, flooding several rooms. Guests were demanding compensation. Journalists smelled blood. "I have to," Thatcher began. "Go," said Wren. "Resolve what you need to resolve." He stood, divided between duty and desire. He wanted to stay, wanted to show her that she was more important than any business crisis. But old habits died slowly, and the impulse to run toward problems instead of toward people was a hard addiction to break. "I'll be back soon," he promised, leaning to kiss her forehead. She didn't respond, but her eyes told a different story. A story of accumulated disappointments, of promises broken by other men before him, of hopes that had learned not to rise too high. When Thatcher left the suite, he carried with him the certainty that he had just failed his first test as a husband, and they hadn't even finished breakfast on the first day of their honeymoon. The Charleston Hotel was a Georgian mansion from the 18th century that Thatcher had acquired 5 years earlier, when he was still married to Vivian, and believed that business success could fill the voids in his personal life. He had restored it with almost obsessive dedication, hiring the best architects and decorators in the country to return it to its original splendor. Now, as he walked through the flooded lobby, with dirty water lapping at his Italian leather shoes, he felt the universe was sending him a message he didn't know how to interpret. "The damage is considerable," reported Gerald, his trusted assistant for a decade, a small man with round glasses and implacable efficiency. 15 rooms affected, 4 guests threatening to sue, and the media are already outside, asking if this is related to last year's maintenance cuts. Thatcher frowned. "What cuts? I never authorized maintenance cuts." Gerald coughed uncomfortably. "They were instructions from the board, sir. During your absence in Savannah, they said there was room to optimize costs." Savannah, where he had spent months inventing excuses to see Wren, neglecting the empire he had built with his own hands. Guilt struck him like a wave, mixing with rage toward a board that had taken advantage of his distraction to make decisions behind his back. "Call an emergency meeting," he ordered, "for tomorrow in New York." "Sir, you're on your honeymoon. I'm aware of my marital situation, Gerald. Call the meeting." He spent the following hours managing the crisis with surgical precision, calls to lawyers, negotiations with furious guests, carefully worded statements for the press. It was familiar territory, a battlefield where he knew exactly how to move. But every time his phone vibrated, he hoped to see Wren's name on the screen. And every time it didn't appear, disappointment accumulated like sediment at the bottom of his stomach. It was Marigold, Wren's mother, who called him late at night when he was already installed in an improvised room in the damaged hotel. "My daughter told me what happened," said the woman, with that Georgia drawl that always made him think of artisans singing under the southern sun. "I'm not calling to reproach you, Thatcher. I'm calling because someone needs to tell you what Wren is too proud to admit." "What's that?" "That she's sitting on the balcony of that fancy suite watching the sea, wondering if she made the biggest mistake of her life." The words fell like hot lead. "She knew who I was when she agreed to marry me," he defended himself, though the defense sounded hollow. "She knew I have responsibilities, obligations. She knew you're a scared man who hides behind work, so he doesn't have to face his emotions," Marigold interrupted. "Everyone knows. But she loved you anyway, because she saw something in you that you can't see yourself. Don't make her regret that faith, Thatcher. Don't break her heart before the first week is over." He remained silent, looking at the walls of the room where he had taken refuge. Walls he himself had chosen to decorate with reproductions of Tiffany glass because they reminded him of Wren's studio, because they were the closest to her he could have when they were apart. "What should I do?" he finally asked, and the vulnerability in his voice surprised even himself. "Go back," Marigold said simply. "Not tomorrow. Not when you finish with your meetings. Tonight, now. And when you arrive, don't explain anything. Just hold her. The rest will come on its own." He hung up the phone and remained motionless for several minutes, weighing his options. The board meeting, the scandal-hungry journalists, the lawyers awaiting instructions. All of that was important, urgent, demanding. But none of it would make him happy. He grabbed his jacket and left the room. Gerald intercepted him in the hallway with a folder full of documents requiring signatures. "Sir, the confidentiality agreements for the guests, they can wait. But the board can go to hell." Gerald opened his mouth to protest, but something in Thatcher's expression stopped him. It was the first time in 10 years he had seen his boss act on impulse instead of calculation. "Where are you going, sir?" "Home," Thatcher answered. "To my wife." The return trip to Monterey took 4 hours by car, crossing the California countryside beneath a starry sky that seemed to stretch to infinity. Thatcher drove with the windows open, letting the fresh night air dispel the cobwebs of worry that always clouded his mind. He arrived at the hotel as dawn began to paint the horizon pink and orange. He went up to the suite with his heart beating faster than he remembered it could beat, and found her exactly where Marigold had said, on the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes fixed on the sea. He said nothing. He simply approached, sat beside her, and embraced her. Wren tensed for an instant, surprised. Then gradually she relaxed in his arms, resting her head against his chest. "I thought you weren't coming back," she whispered. "I thought so too," he admitted. "But it turns out there are things more important than burst pipes and boards of directors." She laughed, a small, fragile sound that reminded him of the clink of glasses when they toasted with wine. "Who are you, and what have you done with my husband?" I'm trying to figure that out, he answered honestly. Will you help me? Wren raised her gaze to his, and in her hazel eyes, Thatcher saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. Not the blind hope of one who ignores obstacles, but the mature hope of one who knows them and decides to move forward anyway. Always, she said. And as the rising sun painted the Monterey Sea liquid gold, two broken people began the long process of learning to heal together. The 2 weeks of honeymoon ended faster than either of them would have wished. The return to reality arrived in the form of a black sedan parked in front of the hotel, with Gerald waiting by the door with his eternal folder of documents and his expression of perpetual apology. "The board insists on seeing you today, sir," he informed, as Thatcher stepped out of the taxi. "They've called an emergency session. They say there are irregularities that need to be discussed." Thatcher felt tension accumulate in his shoulders. Beside him, Wren observed the scene with that calm of hers that he was beginning to understand as a form of strength. "Take the bags to the Manhattan apartment," he told her. "I'll catch up as soon as I can." "Can I come with you?" Wren asked, surprising him. "To a board meeting. If I'm going to be part of your life, I should know all its parts, not just the pretty ones." He hesitated. Board meetings were corporate battlefields, where people played dirty and spoke in euphemisms loaded with poison. It was no place for someone like Wren, whose greatest professional concern was finding the exact tone of cobalt blue for a 17th-century glass panel. But her look admitted no discussion, and he was beginning to learn that battles with Wren were lost before they began. "All right," he yielded, "but don't intervene. No matter what happens." The boardroom of the corporate building on Park Avenue was all glass and steel, a monument to modernity that contrasted violently with the historic hotels Thatcher had dedicated his life to preserving. The 7 board members were already seated when he entered, with Wren a step behind. The looks they received were revealing: poorly disguised curiosity, barely contained condescension. And in the case of Aldous Crane, the executive vice president who had spent years waiting for an opportunity to overthrow him, something that looked dangerously like satisfaction. "Thatcher," Aldous greeted, with that oily smile that always put Thatcher on guard. "And this must be the famous Wren. Delighted to finally meet you. The papers don't do you justice." "Thank you," she responded, not accepting the extended hand. "Though I prefer to be known for my work rather than paparazzi photographs." An uncomfortable silence followed her words. Thatcher felt an unexpected pang of pride. His wife had just put Aldous Crane in his place with more elegance than he had ever managed. "Well," he said, taking a seat at the head of the table, "what are these irregularities so urgent?" What followed was an hour of veiled accusations and manipulated numbers. Aldous had spent the 2 weeks of the honeymoon preparing a case against Thatcher, arguing that his prolonged absence and his frequent trips to Savannah during the previous months had caused significant losses. The Charleston Hotel incident, according to him, was just the tip of the iceberg. "What we propose," Aldous concluded with false solemnity, "is a restructuring of leadership. Temporary, of course, just until Mr. Pemberton can demonstrate that his personal situation is not affecting his ability to lead this company." Thatcher maintained his composure, though inside he seethed with rage. He knew this game. He had played it himself dozens of times against competitors and enemies, but he never expected it to be used against him within his own company. "And who would lead this temporary restructuring?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Well, given that I'm the executive vice president—" "No." Wren's voice cut through the air like a knife. All eyes turned to her, including Thatcher's, who looked at her with a mixture of surprise and warning. "With all due respect, Mrs. Pemberton," said Aldous, dragging out the words with barely disguised contempt, "this is a business meeting. Your presence here is already an unconventional courtesy." Wren stood. She was small compared to the suited men surrounding her, but in that moment she seemed to fill the entire room. "I've spent 8 months listening to my husband talk about this company," she said, her voice firm and clear. "I know every hotel, every project, every challenge. And I also know about the letters you sent to investors during Thatcher's trip to Savannah, suggesting the company needed a change of direction." Aldous paled. "That's confidential?" she completed. "Perhaps. But walls have ears, Mr. Crane, especially when one whispers too loudly in the hallways." Thatcher observed his wife with new eyes. The woman who restored stained glass with infinite patience had just demonstrated that she also knew how to fight when necessary. "This meeting ends here," he declared, standing. "And Aldous, consider this a formal warning. If I find out about any more moves behind my back, your next letter will be your termination." They left the building in silence, the Manhattan sun hitting their faces like a purifying bath. Thatcher didn't speak until they were inside the car, with tinted windows protecting them from the outside world. "You shouldn't have done that," he finally said. "Probably not," Wren admitted. "But someone had to. I'm going to have to find out how you knew about those letters." She smiled, and there was something mischievous in that smile he hadn't seen before. "Gerald talks a lot when he's nervous, and I know how to listen." Thatcher shook his head, unable to contain a laugh. It was the first time he had truly laughed in days. "You're dangerous, Wren Pemberton." "Only when provoked," she responded. "And that man provoked me from the moment he looked at you like you were an obstacle to be eliminated." The car pulled away, leaving behind the glass and steel building. But Thatcher knew the battle had barely begun. Aldous wouldn't accept defeat easily, and the honeymoon had ended in more ways than one. What he didn't know was that the real storm was yet to come. 3 months after the confrontation in the boardroom, Thatcher and Wren's life had found a precarious routine. She divided her time between the Manhattan apartment and her studio in Savannah, where she continued restoring the stained glass that was her passion. He had retaken the reins of his company with renewed determination, though the shadows of Aldous's conspiracy continued lurking in every meeting. It was Beatrix, his younger daughter, who broke the balance one Sunday in October. She appeared without warning at the Manhattan apartment, with a small suitcase and eyes red from hours of crying. Thatcher was alone that day, since Wren had traveled to Savannah to supervise a particularly delicate project. "Dad?" said the teenager, and that single word contained more emotions than he knew how to interpret. "B, what happened? Why aren't you with your mother?" "Because my mother is a liar." The story that followed left Thatcher frozen. Vivian, apparently, had been seeing another man during the last years of their marriage. The supposed infidelity she had used as a weapon during the divorce, the accusations that almost destroyed Thatcher's reputation, all of it had been a smokescreen to hide her own indiscretions. "I found the letters," Beatrix said, pulling a stack of envelopes from her suitcase. "They were hidden in her dresser. They're dated from when you two were still married." Thatcher took the letters with trembling hands. He recognized the sender's handwriting. It was a lawyer from the firm that had represented Vivian during the divorce. The words they contained were more than professional. "Why are you showing me this now?" he asked. "I thought you hated me." "I hated you for a long time," the girl admitted, letting herself fall onto the sofa as if her legs could no longer support her. "Mom convinced me that you were the one who destroyed the family, that you were cold, distant, incapable of loving. And I believed her because it was easier to have someone to blame. But then I met Wren." Thatcher blinked, confused. "How?" "I went to Savannah 2 weeks ago, without telling you. I wanted to see what kind of woman would marry you. I expected to find a gold digger, a social climber, something that would confirm everything Mom said about her. And what did you find?" Beatrix smiled, and it was the first genuine smile Thatcher had seen on her face since she was a little girl. "I found someone who talks about you like you're, I don't know, something precious that she's afraid of breaking. She showed me her studio, explained how she restores the glass, and the whole time she talked about you, about how much she loves you, about how hard it is for you to trust people, about how she's willing to wait as long as necessary, until you learn to stop being afraid." Tears threatened to overflow, but Thatcher held them back. He had spent too many years not crying in front of his children to start now. "I didn't know she had done that." "Because she didn't tell you. She asked me to keep it secret until I was ready to talk to you. She said everyone has their own time to heal and she couldn't force mine." They sat in silence for a long moment, father and daughter in the living room of an apartment too large for the people who inhabited it. "Can I stay here?" Beatrix finally asked. "Not forever, just until I figure out what to do with all of this." "This is your home," Thatcher said, and the words scraped his throat with pure emotion. "It always has been." That night, when Wren called from Savannah to wish him good night, Thatcher told her everything. Beatrix's arrival, the letters, Vivian's betrayal revealed after so many years. "How do you feel?" she asked, and her voice was a balm through the phone waves. I don't know, I should be furious or satisfied that the truth came out, but I only feel empty. Emptiness is the space that remains when pain leaves, Wren said. It's what exists before something new can grow. Where do you get these things? From the cracks in broken glass. If you look closely, they always have something to teach. He smiled in the darkness of his room, imagining her miles away, surrounded by fragments of glass and ancient colors. I miss you, he said, surprising himself with how easy it was to say those words now. I miss you too, but I'll be there tomorrow. And in the meantime, take care of your daughter. She needs you more than she knows how to admit. They hung up, and Thatcher lay staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had changed in recent months. The man he had been, the one who controlled everything and felt nothing, seemed to belong to another life. In his place was this new Thatcher, still clumsy in the language of emotions, but at least willing to learn it. What he didn't know was that the hardest lesson was about to arrive, wrapped in flames and ashes. The call came at 3 a.m, tearing him from a restless sleep. Gerald's voice trembled on the other end of the line. Sir, the Charleston Hotel. There's a fire. The following hours were a blur of fragmented images. The nighttime helicopter flight. The flames consuming the east wing of the Georgian mansion. The firefighters battling a blaze that seemed to have a will of its own. And in the midst of everything, the frozen certainty that everything he had built could vanish in a single night. The guests are safe, reported the hotel director, a 50-year-old man with a face covered in soot. We evacuated them as soon as the alarm sounded, but the structural damage is considerable. Thatcher contemplated the smoking ruins of what had been his pride. The Charleston Hotel wasn't just a business. It was the first project he had undertaken alone, without his father's help, without the backing of skeptical investors. Every stone of that building represented a battle won against those who doubted him. How did it start, he asked, though part of him already suspected the answer. Short circuit in the electrical system. Apparently the repairs after last year's flooding weren't done correctly. The repairs that the board had supervised during his honeymoon. The budget cuts that Aldous had implemented behind his back. The rage he felt was so intense, it nearly made him stagger. But when he opened his mouth to release the avalanche of furious words fighting to escape, he felt a small hand slip between his fingers. Wren was there. He didn't know how she had arrived or when, but she was there, her face pale and her eyes full of concern. But present. Always present. Breathe, she whispered. Just breathe. And he did. He inhaled the air laden with ash and smoke, and released it slowly, letting the anger dissipate like steam from the firefighters' hoses. I can rebuild it, he said, more to himself than to her. It will take years, cost millions, but I can do it. You can, Wren confirmed, but not tonight. Tonight you just have to survive. The investigations that followed confirmed what Thatcher already knew. The faulty repairs had been the direct result of budget cuts ordered by Aldous and approved by the board in his absence. He had enough evidence to destroy his vice president, to drag him through the courts and make public every detail of his negligence, but he didn't do it. Instead, he arranged a private meeting with Aldous at an anonymous cafe in Manhattan, far from boardrooms and corporate witnesses. You could destroy me, Aldous said, looking like a man who hadn't slept in days. Why don't you? Thatcher took a sip of his coffee, considering the question. 3 months ago he would have answered without hesitation. Revenge would have been sweet, justified, deserved. Because destroying you doesn't rebuild my hotel, he finally answered. And because I've learned that the control we seek over others is just an illusion we feed so we don't have to face what really scares us. And what scares you? Losing the people I love. But I'm not afraid of you anymore, Aldous. And that means I no longer need to destroy you to feel safe. The agreement they reached that afternoon was discreet but definitive. Aldous would resign from his position on the board, citing personal reasons. In exchange, Thatcher wouldn't make public the evidence of his negligence. It wasn't justice in the traditional sense, but it was a peace that allowed both of them to move forward. When he arrived home that night, he found Wren and Beatrix sitting in the living room, with a cardboard box between them full of old papers and faded photographs. "What's all this?" he asked. "Your family's history," Wren answered. "Bea helped me find these files in the storage unit. They're letters and photos from your grandfather, from when he built his first inn in Vermont." Thatcher sat beside them, picking up a yellowed photograph of a young man in front of a modest stone building. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same grey eyes, the same determined jaw. "I never knew this story," he murmured. "Because you never looked for it," Beatrix said, and there was no reproach in her voice, just observation. "You were too busy building the future to look at the past." Wren pointed to a letter written in old-fashioned handwriting. "Your grandfather lost that first inn in a fire. It says here he thought it was the end, that he could never recover. But he did. He rebuilt. And that second inn was the one that eventually became the hotel your father inherited." Thatcher read the words of a man who had died decades before he was born, and felt a connection that transcended time. Ashes are the price we pay for daring to create something beautiful, but they are also the fertilizer that allows what comes next to be even more beautiful. That night, for the first time since the fire, Thatcher slept in peace, and in his dreams he saw the Charleston Hotel rising from its ashes, more magnificent than ever, with stained glass restored by his wife's hands gleaming under the Carolina sun. The reconstruction of the Charleston Hotel became a family project. Thatcher supervised the work, negotiating with architects and contractors. Wren designed a new decorative scheme that integrated traditional stained glass with modern elements, and even Beatrix, who had decided to stay indefinitely in Manhattan, contributed fresh ideas from her youthful perspective. It was during one of these planning sessions that Callum, Thatcher's older son, appeared without warning. "I need to talk to you," he said, standing in the doorway of the study where Wren and Thatcher were reviewing blueprints. The 17-year-old had inherited his father's robust build and his mother's dark eyes. But there was something new in his posture, a tension Thatcher didn't recognize. "Of course," he said, setting aside the documents. "Here, or would you prefer we go somewhere else?" Callum looked at Wren, clearly uncomfortable. "I don't mind if she hears," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "She'll find out anyway." Wren rose discreetly. "I'll make some coffee," she said, giving them space. When they were alone, Callum let himself fall into a chair as if his legs could no longer support him. "I've been thinking about dropping out of school. Your mother told me that months ago. You're still set on that idea?" "It's not an idea. It's a decision. I want to work." Thatcher contained the impulse to object immediately. A year ago, he would have launched into a speech about the importance of education, about the opportunities he was wasting, about how disappointed he was. But the man he was now had learned that sometimes silence was more effective than speech. "Work doing what?" Callum seemed surprised by the question. "I don't know yet. Something with my hands. Construction, maybe. Or carpentry. Have you considered restoration?" "Restoration?" "What Wren does. Recovering old things, returning them to their splendor. It requires skilled hands and patience. And given that we're rebuilding an 18th century hotel, we could use apprentices." Callum's face showed a succession of emotions: distrust, curiosity, and finally something that looked like hope. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you an opportunity to discover what you want to do. No pressure, no expectations. If after 6 months you decide this isn't for you, we'll look for something else. If you decide to go back to school, I'll support you. But I'm not going to force you to follow a path you don't want, just because I think it's right." "Why?" "Because years ago someone forced me to make decisions I didn't want to make, and I spent decades paying the price. I'm not going to do the same to you." Callum was silent for a long moment. "B says you've changed." "That since you married Wren, you're different." "Is that bad?" "No, it's just weird. I spent years thinking I knew who you were, and now it turns out I didn't know you at all." "I didn't know myself either," Thatcher admitted. "But I'm learning. I guess it's never too late for that." Wren returned with 3 cups of coffee, acting as if she hadn't heard anything of the conversation, though Thatcher suspected she had caught every word. They sat together, father, son, and the woman who was rebuilding not just stained glass but an entire fractured family. "If you're going to work in restoration," Wren said, addressing Callum naturally, "the first thing you need to learn is that patience is more important than technique. Anyone can learn to mix pigments, but waiting for the exact moment to apply them is an art that takes years to master." "And what happens while you wait?" Callum asked. "You observe, you listen. You let the material tell you its story before trying to change it. Sounds incredibly boring. Wren smiled. It sounds incredibly boring, until you discover that the waiting is where the magic happens. It's in the silence that broken things begin to remember what they were before they broke. Callum looked at her with new curiosity, as if seeing her for the first time. My sister was right about you, he said. You're not what I expected. No one ever is, Wren responded. And that's what makes people interesting. That night, Thatcher and Wren walked through the streets of downtown Manhattan with no fixed destination, simply enjoying each other's company beneath the city lights. Thank you, he said suddenly. For what? For not forcing anything, for letting things happen at their own pace. Wren intertwined her fingers with his. I learned long ago that the best restorations are the ones that leave no trace of the restorer. The goal is for the piece to appear to have always been complete, as if the cracks had never existed. But the cracks did exist. They did, yes, and they'll always be there, invisible but present. That's what makes them valuable. The cracks are the map of everything we've survived. Thatcher stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, turning her to face him. The light from a nearby street lamp illuminated her face, revealing every detail of her features. The hazel eyes that had disarmed him from the first day, the lips curved in that smile that was just for him. I love you, he said, and the words came with an ease that would have surprised him months before. I didn't say it at our wedding. I didn't say it on our honeymoon, but I need you to know now. I love you, Wren. And not just for what you do for me, but for who you are when I'm not looking. She rose on tiptoe to kiss him, a soft kiss that tasted of coffee and kept promises. I love you too, she whispered against his lips, even when you were impossible, especially when you were impossible. They stayed that way for an eternal moment, two silhouettes merged beneath the lights of Manhattan, while the city bustled around them without paying them attention. Because true love doesn't need witnesses. It only needs time, patience, and the will to keep choosing each other day after day. The piece they had built cracked one February afternoon when Wren found the letters. She was organizing Thatcher's study, looking for documents related to the Charleston Hotel, when a stuck drawer finally yielded to her insistence. Inside was a stack of yellowed envelopes, tied with a faded blue ribbon. The letters were from a woman named Valentina, and they were dated during the first year of Thatcher's marriage to Vivian. Wren read them all one by one, her heart beating faster and faster. The words painted a portrait of an intense and clandestine passion, of stolen encounters in provincial hotels, of promises whispered in the darkness. Thatcher, the man who swore he had been betrayed, had his own secret history. When he arrived that night, he found her sitting in the living room with the letters spread across the coffee table. You need to explain this to me, she said, and her voice was firm, but her hands trembled. Thatcher stood frozen in the doorway, recognizing the envelopes instantly. The color drained from his face, leaving him pale as the whitewashed walls of southern mansions. Wren, don't tell me it's not what it looks like. I've read every word. I know exactly what it is. He approached slowly, as if each step cost him a superhuman effort. He sat before her, separated by the table full of unearthed secrets. It was 20 years ago, he began. Valentina was a childhood friend. We reconnected at a conference in Denver, a year after my wedding to Vivian. Things between us were already bad. The marriage had been a mistake from the beginning, and she what? Understood you. Made you feel alive. The bitterness colored every syllable. I've heard those excuses before, Thatcher. I heard them from men who came looking for my mother when they thought no one was watching. They're not excuses. They're explanations. What's the difference? The difference is that I'm not trying to justify what I did. It was wrong. It was cowardly. And when Vivian found out, I deserved all the pain that came after. Wren felt the air leave her lungs. Vivian knew. She found the letters, just like you. It's what destroyed our marriage, though she used it to destroy me afterward. The accusations of infidelity she made during the divorce were true. I was the betrayer first. The silence that followed was thick, charged with all the questions fighting to emerge. Why didn't you tell me? Wren finally asked. Before the wedding, when you told me about your failed marriage, about how Vivienne had betrayed you. Why did you leave out this part? Because I was afraid of losing you. You were afraid of losing control, she corrected. of me knowing you're not the perfect man you appear to be. I never appeared to be perfect. No, you only appeared to be the victim. The wounded man hurt by a cruel wife who didn't appreciate him. The martyr who built walls because the world treated him unfairly. The words struck where it hurt most, precisely because they were true. You're right, Thatcher admitted. I built myself a comfortable narrative where I was the innocent one, and everyone else was to blame. It's easier to live that way. It hurts less. Wren stood, needing physical distance to think clearly. I need time, she said. I don't know how to process this or what it means for us. I only know that right now I can't look at you without seeing all the lies you built to protect yourself. Are you leaving? The question floated between them, charged with terror. I don't know, she answered honestly. But I need to go to Savannah, to my studio, to a place where things make sense. Can I come with you? No. This is something I need to do alone. She gathered the letters, not to take them, but to return them to the drawer where they had remained hidden for years. Then she took her coat and purse, moving with the automatic precision of someone who has learned to function even when everything is falling apart. Wren, he called when she was already at the door. Whatever you decide, I need you to know one thing. She stopped but didn't turn around. What happened with Valentina ended 2 decades ago. I haven't seen her again, haven't thought of her except as a reminder of my own failures. But what I feel for you, that's different. That's real. And if you give me the chance to prove it, I'll spend the rest of my life doing so. Wren closed her eyes, letting the words penetrate the layers of pain and disappointment. Chances aren't given, Thatcher. They're earned. And with that, she left the apartment, leaving behind the echo of a door that didn't close with violence, but with the soft finality of a decision made. Wren's studio in Savannah smelled of old enamel and the magnolias in the neighboring courtyard. It was a small space, crammed with shelves of pigment jars, precision tools, and fragments of stained glass waiting to be rescued from oblivion. She had been there 3 weeks, sleeping on the small cot in the corner, eating when she remembered, lost in the work that had always been her refuge. Her hands moved with automatism, cleaning, mixing, applying, while her mind spun in circles that led nowhere. Marigold visited every day, bringing food Wren barely touched, and words of comfort that slid off her pain like water off stone. You can't live like this forever, her mother said one afternoon, watching her work on a particularly complex panel. And you can't make decisions while you're this lost. I'm not lost, I'm thinking. You're running, which isn't the same thing. Wren set down her brush and turned to her mother. The dark circles under her eyes told the story of sleepless nights. He lied to me, Mum, for months. He let me believe he was the victim of his first marriage, when the truth is, he was the one who destroyed it first. And does that change what you feel for him? The question was simple, but the answer was anything but. I don't know, it should. But when I think of him, when I remember how he looks at me, how he touches me, how he's changed since we met, I can't hate him. And that makes me angrier than anything else. Marigold sat on the only available stool, a decrepit piece of furniture that had belonged to Wren's father, before the sea took him in a storm when she was 10. Your father lied to me once too, she said. And Wren went still. Before you were born, there was another woman in another port, one of those story sailors carry with them like salt on their skin. You never told me, because it wasn't your story. It was ours. And we decided it wouldn't define our marriage. How did you get over it? I didn't get over it. I learned to live with it. I learned that people are capable of terrible things, but also of wonderful things. And that choosing to stay with someone doesn't mean ignoring their flaws. It means deciding that what you build together is worth more than what separates you. Wren looked at the panel of stained glass before her. It was an 18th century scene, a garden with fountains and cypress trees, fragmented into dozens of pieces she was patiently reconstructing. Sometimes I look at this glass and wonder if we'll ever know how it really looked, she said. We fill in the gaps with assumptions, with interpretations, with what we think should be there. But the truth is those lost parts are gone forever. And does that make the restoration not worth it? No, it just makes it different. Less perfect than it could have been, but beautiful anyway. Marigold smiled, the smile of a mother who sees her daughter approaching a truth she had long been waiting for. Then you already have your answer. That night, Wren dreamed of the Charleston Hotel, not the ruined building she had seen after the fire, but the one beginning to emerge from the ashes, with its new wooden beams and walls waiting to be decorated. In the dream, she walked through its empty corridors, and in each room she found a different piece of glass, some intact, others fragmented, all telling stories of survival. She woke with the first light of dawn, knowing what she had to do. Thatcher had stopped counting the days since Wren left. Every morning he woke hoping to find a message from her, and every night he lay down with the void of her absence weighing on his chest like a tombstone. Beatrix and Callum had moved into the Manhattan apartment, worried about a father who seemed to be crumbling before their eyes. The man who had always been a pillar of strength now wandered through the rooms like a ghost, unable to concentrate on work, unable to sleep, unable to do anything but wait. "You need to talk to her," Beatrix said one morning, finding him sitting in the study with his gaze lost. "Go to Savannah. Explain." "I already explained everything." "She knows the truth. She knows the facts. She doesn't know how you feel." "What difference does that make?" "All the difference in the world, Dad." He looked at her, surprised by the maturity he saw in her teenage eyes. "When did you become so wise?" "When you stopped being unreachable, and I started actually knowing you." Callum appeared in the doorway, phone in hand. "You have a call. It's the director of the Charleston Hotel. He says it's urgent." Thatcher took the phone with reluctance, expecting another crisis to face. "Yes?" "Mr. Pemberton, there's someone here who wants to see you. Says her name is Valentina." The name hit like a punch. Valentina. After 20 years. "Why now?" "Tell her I'm not available." "Sir, she insists. She says she has information you need to hear. About your wife." The world seemed to stop. "I'll be there in 4 hours." The trip to Charleston was a whirlwind of unanswered questions. What could Valentina know about Wren? Why was she appearing now, just when everything was falling apart? Was it a coincidence or something more sinister? He found her waiting in the lobby of the hotel under reconstruction, a woman the years had treated kindly, but who no longer resembled the passionate young woman of his memories. "Thatcher," she greeted with a smile that contained too many stories. "It's been a long time." "What are you doing here, Valentina?" "I came to apologize, and to tell you something I should have told you 20 years ago." They sat in a corner of the makeshift restaurant, operating during the construction. She ordered black coffee, he ordered nothing. "When Vivian found our letters, she came to see me," Valentina began. "She was furious, of course, but not for the reasons you think. You see, she already knew about us before finding the letters. Someone had told her." "Who?" "I did. I wrote her an anonymous letter telling her everything." The silence that followed was dense as lead. "Why would you do that?" "Because I was in love with you. Madly, obsessively in love. And I thought that if your marriage fell apart, you would come to me. That we would choose to be together." Thatcher felt nausea climbing up his throat. "You destroyed my life on a whim. I destroyed it because I was young and stupid and didn't understand the consequences of my actions. And I've carried that guilt for 2 decades, watching you from afar, seeing how you built an empire on the ruins of what I helped demolish. Why are you telling me this now? Because I found out you got married again. And because when I looked into your new wife, I discovered something that made me understand that fate has strange ways of closing circles." Valentina pulled a photograph from her purse and slid it across the table. It was an old image, faded, of 2 little girls playing on a beach. "The woman on the left is my younger sister. The one on the right is Wren." Thatcher stared at the photo, incredulous. "That can't be. They grew up together in coastal Georgia." "They were best friends until my family moved to Connecticut when they were 10. They lost touch, but my sister never forgot Wren. She says she was the most patient and kind girl she ever knew." "Does Wren know this?" "I have no idea, but I thought you deserved to know. And that you deserve to know the truth about what happened with Vivian. Not to redeem myself because what I did has no redemption, but because someone who loves the way you seem to love this woman deserves to have all the pieces of the puzzle." Thatcher stared at the photograph for long minutes. 2 innocent girls, decades before their lives would cross in ways neither could have predicted. "Thank you for telling me this," he finally said. "I don't forgive you. I probably never will. But I appreciate the truth." He rose to leave, but Valentina's voice stopped him. "One more thing. My sister told me something about Wren, something she remembered from when they were children. She said Wren had a gift for seeing what others couldn't see. that she looked at broken things and saw what they could become. "I know," Thatcher said. "It was the first thing I knew about her." "Then don't let her go. People like that are rare, and second chances are even rarer." He left the hotel with the photograph in his pocket and renewed determination in his heart. He had to find Wren. He had to tell her everything, the truth about Valentina, the unexpected connection to her past, and most importantly, how much he needed her. But when he arrived at the Savannah studio, he found it empty. A sign on the door announced that the artisan was absent indefinitely, and then he knew he had lost her. Wren wasn't in Savannah. She wasn't in Georgia either, where Marigold had waited for her without success. She had vanished without a trace, taking only a backpack and the basic tools of her craft. Thatcher searched for her for weeks. He hired investigators, called every contact she might have, visited every museum and restoration workshop in the country. Nothing. It was as if the earth had swallowed her. It was Callum who finally found the lead, almost by accident. He had been working on the Charleston hotel construction, learning the fundamentals of restoration as Thatcher had promised, when one of the craftsmen mentioned a special project. "There's a woman in Santa Fe," the old master said. "They say she's restoring a stained glass panel that no one else dared to touch. She's been working alone in an abandoned chapel near the old town for months." Thatcher drove all night to New Mexico, guided by vague directions and the desperate hope that it was her. He found the chapel at dawn, a small adobe building hidden among ancient cottonwood trees. The door was open. Inside, bathed by the light streaming through glassless windows, Wren worked on a panel of stained glass depicting a garden of paradise. "I knew you'd find me," she said without turning. "I just didn't expect it to take so long. I tried, the investigators couldn't—" "You didn't hire the right investigators," she responded, and there was something that might be humor in her voice. "Any decent restorer knows about this project. It's legendary in the field." Thatcher approached slowly, fearing any sudden movement might frighten her like a wild bird. "Why did you leave without saying anything?" "Because I needed to find something before coming back. And I knew I couldn't find it with you nearby." "What were you looking for?" Wren finally turned to look at him. She was thinner than he remembered, with paint stains on her clothes and her hair pulled back in a messy bun, but her eyes were the same, deep, serene, capable of seeing through all defenses. "I was looking to understand why I chose you," she said. "When I discovered the letters, everything I thought I knew about you collapsed. And I needed to know if what I felt was real or just another illusion I had built." "And what did you discover?" "I discovered that love isn't based on who we think the other person is. It's based on who we choose to be when we're with them." She approached him, closing the distance between them until she could touch him. "When I read those letters, the first person I thought of wasn't you. It was me. I thought about all the times I had idealized someone, projected my fantasies onto another person, without seeing who they really were. And I realized I had done the same with you. Wren, let me finish. I turned you into the wounded man I could save. The most important restoration project of my life. But you're not a project, Thatcher. You're a person, with flaws, mistakes, secrets. And I had to accept that before I could decide if I wanted to stay by your side." "And what did you decide?" She took his hand and placed it on the panel of stained glass she had been restoring. The colors gleamed in the morning light, deep blues, warm golds, greens that evoked impossible gardens. "This panel is 300 years old," she said. "It has survived earthquakes, floods, centuries of neglect. When I found it, it was so damaged that most experts said it was beyond repair. But I saw something they didn't see." "What did you see?" "I saw that the cracks weren't its weakness. They were its history. Each fracture told something about what it had survived, and my job wasn't to erase those cracks, but to integrate them into something new." Thatcher felt tears burning behind his eyes. "I'm not an antique piece of glass. No, you're something much more complex. But the principle is the same. I can't erase your past, Thatcher. I can't pretend the letters didn't exist, that Valentina didn't happen, that the mistakes you made have disappeared. But I can choose to see those cracks as part of who you are now, and I can choose to stay. You're staying? I'm staying, but with conditions. Whatever you want. No more secrets. No more walls. If we're going to do this, we do it for real, with everything ugly and everything beautiful. with everything that scares us and everything that heals. He nodded, unable to speak. And one more thing, she added with a smile that lit up the entire chapel. I want you to learn to restore, not just supervise but work with your hands. I want you to understand what it means to rebuild something piece by piece. Why? Because it's the only way to understand what we're doing with ourselves. He kissed her then, in that forgotten chapel where the old glass told stories of paradises lost and recovered. And in that kiss was everything words couldn't express: the pain of separation, the joy of reunion, and the promise of a future built on more honest foundations. When they finally separated, the sun had finished rising, flooding the space with golden light. Do we go home? He asked. First, help me finish this panel, she answered, handing him a brush. That's how your first lesson begins. The following months were a period of silent transformation. Thatcher divided his time between the New York offices, the Charleston hotel construction, and Wren's studio in Savannah, where he learned the rudiments of an art that required infinite patience. At first, his attempts were clumsy. Hands accustomed to signing contracts and shaking executives' hands didn't know how to hold a brush with the necessary delicacy. More than once, Wren had to suppress laughter at his efforts. You're thinking too much, she would say. Technique comes later. First, you need to feel the material. How does one feel a piece of glass? Like everything else, with attention. Gradually, something began to change. Thatcher discovered there was a profound peace in manual work, an active meditation that silenced the anxious voices in his mind. When he concentrated on applying pigments to a fragment of glass, the outside world disappeared. There were no boards of directors or financial statements or ex-wives conspiring. Only the present moment existed, the touch of the brush on the smooth surface, and the colors gradually coming to life. He also discovered things about himself he had never explored. He had a good eye for color, a skill no one, not even he, knew he possessed. And there was a latent creativity beneath all the layers of business pragmatism, an imagination that had lain dormant for decades. Your grandfather would have been proud, Wren commented one afternoon, observing the first piece of glass he had restored completely on his own. It was a small piece, barely 4 inches square, with a geometric pattern in blue and white. It wasn't perfect. You could see the trembling brushstrokes in some areas, and there were small imperfections in the enamel. But it was his. Completely his. It's terrible, Thatcher said, though he couldn't hide the pride in his voice. It's your first piece, and it's perfectly imperfect. The relationship with his children also evolved. Callum had found his calling in restoration, surprising everyone with a natural talent that surpassed even his father's. He now worked as an official apprentice at the Charleston Hotel, under the supervision of master craftsmen who treated him as one of their own. Beatrix, for her part, had decided to resume her studies, but with a different focus. She wanted to study art history, specialize in cultural heritage preservation. She said it was the perfect way to combine her father's business legacy with her stepmother's artistic passion. It's strange to call you that, she admitted one day, as the 3 women in Thatcher's life lunched together at a restaurant in Savannah. Stepmother. It sounds like a fairy tale and not the good kind. You can call me Wren, she responded. Or Rennie, like your dad calls me when he thinks no one's listening. Rennie? He says it's because I bring song to his days. It's cheesy, I know. Beatrix laughed, and the sound was like wind chimes in a spring breeze. It's not cheesy, it's sweet. I never thought I'd use that word to describe anything related to my dad. People change, said Marigold, who had insisted on joining the lunch. Especially when they find someone who sees them as they really are. The Charleston Hotel reopened its doors in September, 2 years after the fire. The opening ceremony brought together journalists, dignitaries, and figures from the business world, all eager to see the result of the ambitious restoration. But what captured everyone's attention wasn't the luxurious finishes or the cutting-edge technology. It was the stained glass panel that dominated the main lobby, a scene depicting the mythical garden of the Hesperides, with golden orange trees and crystal fountains, executed with a technique that fused traditional craftsmanship with contemporary sensibility. In a discreet corner of the panel, almost imperceptible to anyone who didn't know to look, there was a small, deliberate imperfection, a piece of glass slightly misaligned, with brushstrokes that betrayed an inexperienced hand. "Why did you leave that error there?" a journalist asked Wren during the interviews. "Because it's not an error," she answered. "It's a reminder that the most beautiful things are born from imperfection." What she didn't say, what she kept for herself, and for the man watching her from across the room with shining eyes, was that that imperfect piece of glass was the first one Thatcher had restored, and that, including it in the most important panel of the hotel, was her way of telling him that his cracks were also part of the beauty they were building together. The following spring brought unexpected news. Wren was pregnant. The revelation came one April morning, with the magnolias in the courtyard of their Savannah home in full bloom. She had suspected for weeks, but hadn't wanted to say anything until she was sure. And now, with the test results in hand, she felt a mix of emotions she didn't know how to process. Thatcher was in New York when she called. "I need you to come to Savannah," she said. "Today, if possible." "Did something happen? Are you all right?" "I'm fine, but there's something I need to tell you in person." He arrived 6 hours later, his face tight with worry. He found her in the studio, seated before the panel she had brought from Santa Fe, which now hung in a place of honor. "What is it?" he asked, kneeling before her. "You've had me worried the whole trip." Wren took his hand and placed it on her still flat belly. "We're going to have a child." The silence that followed was different from any other they had shared. It wasn't the tense silence of arguments or the comfortable silence of everyday moments. It was the sacred silence of life-changing moments. "A child?" Thatcher's voice was barely a whisper. "Or a daughter? We won't know for a few months." He remained motionless for what seemed an eternity. Then slowly, as if afraid of breaking something fragile, he rested his forehead against her belly. "A child," he repeated, and there was wonder in every syllable. "We're going to have a child. Are you happy?" He raised his gaze to hers, and Wren saw he was crying. Not the contained tears of their first night together, but free tears running down his cheeks without shame. "I'm 45 years old," he said. "I thought that part of my life was over, that my only children would be Callum and Beatrix, and that I had failed them in every possible way." "You didn't fail. They're here. They love you. But I didn't watch them grow up, not like I should have. I was too busy building an empire that now seems empty. Then this is your second chance." He nodded, wiping the tears with the back of his hand. "My second chance," he repeated. "I won't waste it. I promise." The months of pregnancy were a period of definitive transformation for Thatcher. He drastically reduced his workload, delegating responsibilities to a trusted team he had formed over the past year. He spent mornings in the studio with Wren, afternoons reading about fatherhood and parenting, and nights simply beside her, watching her belly grow with the promise of new life. Callum and Beatrix received the news with enthusiasm that surprised everyone. Far from feeling jealous or resentful, they seemed genuinely excited about the arrival of a brother or sister. "I always wanted to be a big sister," Beatrix admitted. "I mean, really big. Callum doesn't count because he came first." "Thanks for the consideration," her brother responded with affectionate sarcasm. It was during the 7th month of pregnancy that Vivienne appeared again, this time without the machinations of before. She asked to see Thatcher alone, and he agreed, more out of curiosity than obligation. They met at a neutral cafe in Manhattan, two people who had shared a life and were now little more than polite strangers. "I heard about the baby," Vivienne said without preamble. "I wanted to congratulate you, thank you, and to apologize." The surprise must have shown on his face, because she smiled bitterly. "I know what I did during the divorce. The lies, the manipulations. And I know what I did before with Valentina's letters. You knew it was she who sent them to you. I knew from the beginning. I recognized her handwriting, but I chose to use them anyway, because they gave me the perfect excuse to end a marriage that was suffocating me. You could have told me the truth. I could have done many things differently. But resentment is easier than honesty, don't you think?" Thatcher observed her, searching her face for traces of the woman he had once loved. They were still there, buried beneath layers of makeup and years of bitterness, but visible to anyone who knew how to look. "I forgive you," he said, and the words surprised him as much as they did her. "Not because you deserve it, but because carrying resentment is too heavy." Vivienne lowered her gaze, and for a moment it seemed she might cry. But she quickly composed herself, recovering the mask of composure that had always been her best defense. "Take care of that woman," she said, rising to leave. "She's better than any of us deserve." "I know. And take care of our children. Despite everything that happened, they're the only good thing that came from us." "I know that too." They parted with a handshake that contained 20 years of shared history, of intertwined love and hate, of mistakes made and lessons learned. They weren't friends and probably never would be, but they were no longer enemies, and that, Thatcher decided as he watched her walk away, was enough. The baby arrived on a December night, when the first winter frost covered the magnolias in the courtyard with ice. It was a girl with her father's grey eyes and her mother's dark hair, who came into the world with a strong cry that filled the hospital room. Thatcher held her in his arms for the first time and felt the universe reorganize itself around him. Everything he had lived through, the victories and failures, the loves and heartbreaks, the years of solitude and the months of reconstruction, all of it had led to this moment. A 46-year-old man holding his newborn daughter, with tears running freely down his face, while his wife watched from the bed with an exhausted but radiant smile. "What shall we name her?" Wren asked. He looked at the little one who had stopped crying and was watching him with that intense, unfocused gaze of newborns. "Aurora," he said, "like the dawn after the longest night." Wren nodded, extending her arms to receive her daughter. "Aurora," she repeated. "It's perfect." And as the southern winter sun began to peek through the hospital window, painting everything gold and rose, a new story began. Not to erase the ones before, but to join them, like a new piece of glass in an ancient mosaic, completing a pattern that was finally beginning to make sense. 5 years later, Thatcher found himself standing before the stained glass panel of the Charleston Hotel, watching Aurora trace the patterns with her small fingers, as Wren explained the meaning of each color. "The blue represents the sky," she was saying. The old craftsmen believed that using this color in their homes was like having a piece of heaven always near. "And the gold?" asked the girl with the insatiable curiosity of 5-year-olds. "Gold represents the sun, the light that illuminates everything, even on the darkest days." Thatcher approached them, wrapping his arm around Wren's waist and kissing the crown of his daughter's head. "Did you know your daddy made that piece of glass over there?" Wren asked, pointing to the imperfect piece in the corner of the panel. Aurora squinted, studying the glass with a seriousness unbecoming her age. "It's a little crooked," she observed. "Yes," Thatcher admitted, smiling. "It's my first piece. I wasn't very good when I started. And now are you good? Now I'm better. But I'm still learning. Mommy says you never stop learning." "Your mommy is very wise." Callum appeared at his side, 23 years old, and looking like someone who had found his place in the world. He wore an apron stained with pigments, and a smile Thatcher remembered from his own youth. "The West Wing panel is finished," he announced. "The wedding clients on Saturday are going to be impressed." "Good work," Thatcher said, and the pride in his voice was genuine. Beatrix arrived shortly after, 21 years old with a newly obtained university degree. She had landed a position at the Smithsonian, working in the conservation department, the first step of a career that promised to shine. "Aurora, want to see the fountains in the garden?" she asked, offering her hand to her little sister. "Daddy says there are goldfish." "Real fish?" "Really real." The little girl took her sister's hand, and the two ran off toward the garden, leaving behind laughter that echoed through the corridors of the rebuilt hotel. Wren leaned against Thatcher, watching their children disappear among the magnolias. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "That 7 years ago I was alone in my Savannah studio, convinced that stained glass was all I needed to be happy. You don't believe that anymore? I still love the glass, but I've discovered there are other ways to restore broken things." Thatcher turned to face her, holding her face between his hands as he had done hundreds of times during the years they had spent together. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For seeing something in me that I couldn't see myself. For teaching me that cracks aren't defects but maps of everything we've survived." Wren smiled, that smile that still had the power to disarm him after all this time. "The cracks are also what lets the light in," she answered. "Someone very wise taught me that once." "Who?" "You. Though you didn't realize it at the time." They kissed beneath the stained glass panel that told their story, while the afternoon sun cast shadows of magnolias on the marble floor and Aurora's laughter drifted from the garden like background music. It wasn't a happy ending because real stories don't have definitive endings. It was a moment of peace in the middle of a journey that would continue, with its joys and sorrows, its victories and defeats. But it was their moment, completely theirs, and that was more than enough. That night, when the family gathered for dinner at the hotel restaurant, Thatcher allowed himself to look around the table and feel, perhaps for the first time in his life, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. To his right, Wren was talking with Marigold about a restoration project they were planning together. To his left, Callum and Beatrix were arguing amiably about conservation techniques. In Wren's lap, Aurora was resisting sleep with the stubbornness of all small children, and at the back of the restaurant, even Holden had appeared, the grandfather from Massachusetts, who at 80 still insisted that no one made clam chowder like he did. It was an imperfect family, built from fragments of other broken families united by choice more than by blood. But it was his, and it was beautiful. When everyone had gone to sleep and the hotel fell silent, Thatcher returned to the lobby one last time. He stopped before the stained glass panel, searching for his imperfect piece in the dimness. "The colors of the soul," he murmured, remembering something Wren had said once long ago. She had explained that every ancient culture had its own theory about the colors of the human soul. The Arabs believed it was blue, like the infinite sky. The Persians thought it was gold, like divine light. Americans, descendants of all those traditions, had decided that the soul didn't have just one color, but all the colors of the rainbow, mixed in unique ways in each person. "My soul has all your colors," he had said then clumsily, not knowing how to express what he felt. And she had responded with that wisdom of hers that always left him speechless. "And mine has yours. That's why we fit so well together." Now, looking at the panel that told the story of his transformation, Thatcher finally understood what she had meant. It wasn't about being perfect or erasing the cracks of the past. It was about mixing the colors, creating something new from the fragments, accepting that the deepest beauty is born from shared imperfections. He turned off the lobby lights and climbed the stairs toward the suite where Wren and Aurora slept. He paused in the doorway of the room, observing the two figures curled beneath the white sheets, his wife with her hair spread across the pillow, his daughter clutching a small ceramic tile Callum had given her. He lay down beside them in silence, breathing in the scent of orange blossom that always accompanied him when he was with Wren. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in a long while, he felt no fear of what tomorrow might bring, because he had finally learned that control was an illusion, that walls only served to isolate oneself from love as much as from pain, and that the most valuable things in life couldn't be planned or calculated or dominated. They could only be embraced, with open hands, with a willing heart, with faith that the cracks that form us are also what allow us to shine. Sometimes the highest walls don't crumble with force, but with patience. With the constant touch of love against the stone, with the light that finds its way through the smallest cracks, and when they finally fall, they don't leave rubble, but gardens where before there was only desert. Outside, the Atlantic continued whispering its ancestral secrets against the American coasts, as it had done for millennia. And in a hotel room where stained glass told stories of paradises lost and recovered, three hearts beat in unison, composing a melody no sheet music could capture, the melody of the colors of the soul.